Hey everyone, welcome back. It's FIA BOCA in sunny Florida. FinanceFeeds is joined now by Joanna Davies. She is head of FX and Securities at OSTTRA. Joanna, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks. Although home to widely known firms like MarketServe, Triana, TriOptima, Reset,
Yep.
OSTTRA is a relatively new name in the post-trade segment. Can you kind of give us an introduction to your company?
Yeah, of course. So OSTTRA has been in existence now for about 15, 16 months. Mm-hmm. But you're absolutely right to say that the assets or services or these mini companies that sit within it have had a long presence in the post-trade industry. So about 16 months ago, the post-trade businesses of the CME mm-hmm. and those of S&P were spun off into a JV, and that created OSTTRA, which houses Triana, TriOptima, Reset, and MarketServe.
I see.
So for once, we brought everything together mm-hmm. for the benefit really of a global customer base, but CME and S&P retain a 50-50 shareholding in the new company.
Mm-hmm. Great. I wanted to say kudos. I know that OSTTRA has been working with FIA's Derivatives Market Institute for Standards,
Correct.
DMIST.
Yes.
We actually had the opportunity to talk to Walt earlier today and Ron, I believe it is?
Yes. Dawn, maybe.
Dawn.
Yeah.
And so kudos to you guys.
Thank you.
To help the industry define sort of the common standard for post-trade processing of exchange-traded derivatives.
Correct.
Why do you think we need a data standard?
Well, going back one step, I was a futures practitioner for about 30 years. Mm-hmm. So I have been involved in every aspect of the futures industry, from futures broking to head of operations for one of the big banks to relationship management, and have spent an awful lot of time trying to overcome some of the systemic problems that exist in the futures workflow. Mm-hmm. So Don and Walt and a community of participants under the DMIST label that you very accurately recited just then, I think post the COVID volatility, where we saw a huge amount of risk enter the futures markets because the volatility had been unseen at that point from mm-hmm. The futures market's perspective, really kicked off a desire as an industry to try and almost self-regulate, to solve for the first time in a long time where the inefficiencies in that futures workflow were, mm-hmm. come together for once, instead of kind of all working in our very siloed fashion to try and solve one problem. They came together, encouraged us all to come to the table with our competencies, our solutions, our experience, and talk about how we create standardization in the futures industry. Mm-hmm. So the consultation paper that DMIST then produced, which is around the 30-30-30, which is 30 minutes from point of execution to generate an allocation instruction, 30 minutes for the executing broker to put that allocation instruction on the give-up transaction and send it down to the clearing broker, and 30 minutes for a clearing broker to get that trade into an end account. Mm-hmm. The idea there was if we could speed up finality of trade in the futures markets, mm-hmm. then you reduce risk and elements of risk, and you meet clearing windows, and you resolve problems and exceptions as quickly and as early in that trade flow as possible. Mm-hmm. The problem with it is if the data that is being passed down is not accurate, you can meet a timeliness standard, and the trade that ends up in the end account is still wrong.
Sure.
So the idea that we should have a timeliness standard is absolutely spot on, mm-hmm. and we're a massive supporter of it. Mm-hmm. Our view was, having sat and participated and watched a lot of the FIA events mm-hmm. with market participants, the idea that there is a significant amount of data inconsistency that is generating and causing some of the problems that we see mm-hmm. Across the workflow is something that we should solve. And I wanted to get to that next stage. I wanted to take the conversation a step further. So after the FIA Expo in Chicago last year, where this conversation was had very robustly by market participants, uh-huh. we took it upon ourselves at OSTTRA to go and visit a number of market participants and track mm-hmm. how data persisted or didn't mm-hmm. across the ETD workflow. Mm-hmm. And from there, we've identified an opportunity to contribute or put forward a data string or a data set that could form or contribute to a data standard that would then sit behind that timeliness standard that the FIA have already proposed. Mm-hmm. And that's the idea, is you bring these two things together. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, now up for broader debate and hopefully broader consultation within the futures markets. Mm-hmm.
Great. And I wanted to ask, could you speak about some of the more persistent causes of trade breaks, since you have a lot of experience from it? I know you visited some market participants.
Yeah.
We don't want to go into confidential details, but in your experience, what are the common causes?
Well, interestingly, some of the most recent have been attributed to voice broking. So actually getting an executing broker notification for voice executed transactions in a timely fashion seems to be one that's coming up a lot. Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say that a significant proportion of futures processing processes accurately in a very short period of time. I mean, well within the 90-minute proposed window. Mm-hmm, there are probably 5-6% that can create enormous risk.
Sure.
And this voice executing EB notification seems to be an area of some concern. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Then move on a little bit to average pricing and trying to match the child orders to a parent order from an average price perspective and get an allocation correct. Mm-hmm. That's another area. There are, I think, 4 or 5 that really house the bulk of the issues. And those are things that we've been testing with these market participants in the conversations we've been having with them. And it's the output from that and those inefficiencies that we think solves the crux of the problem, which we've created the standard to try and encompass.
And I'm going to tell you, I'm surprised that we still do voice broking in the industry.
I mean, there are some markets where it is enormously prevalent. I mean, I started back in, I was 18 years old, so back in kind of 1991, and having just turned 50, I've been in the business a very long time, as you can imagine, and I was a voice broker, and that's what I did for a living. And the markets just gradually went electronic, and then suddenly there seemed to be a tipping point. But there have been and are some historic markets where voice broking is still prevalent, and we still need to have process that allows us to automate and create efficiency, regardless of whether it is, an automated execution or a traditional voice executed trade.
I see. And with respect to the 30-30-30 sort of standard that we're speaking about today, and OSTTRA specifically, OSTTRA, like we said in the beginning, is sort of an amalgamation of these other firms that have been known quite well within the industry, at least from a branding perspective. For me personally, can you tell us a little bit more about how OSTTRA, let's say hypothetically that this 30-30-30 standard will be adopted by market participants. Is there a way that you can talk about how OSTTRA can help market participants follow the standard in the future?
Absolutely. In actual fact, it's not even in the future. We have a solution that does that today. So we process and bring together a network of market participants, so your clients. So we have about 140 buy-side clients on our network. We have 32 executing brokers. We have 11, 12 of the top clearing brokers. And what we're doing is bringing these participants together already. We've had this service in existence probably for 5-10 years. What we've done is over the past kind of 14 months extended that existing and reassuringly mature service to add an extra layer of data accuracy. And this comes back to the point I made slightly earlier on in our conversation when we talked about the persistence of data or the lack of persistence of data in market participants' workflow. And what we've done is we've created a trade order ID that can persist across the workflow. So you tie together data fields through a trade order ID. So I would say that we are processing in real time and that we don't need a 90-minute window. We can help people process that immediately so that they're well within the 30-30-30 timeliness standard and can bring forward finality of trade in the futures markets or in that futures position or that futures transaction on any given trading date. That's already in production today.
Oh, that's awesome. You actually have said previously that this is the clear next step on the roadmap to evolutionary change in exchange-traded derivatives. Can you provide insights into this roadmap, so to say, beyond the standard sort of? Is there other things down the line that we need to be prepared for, or discrepancies or issues that we also need to keep in mind?
Do you know what? How long is a piece of string? I think genuinely there is so much one could do. But just going back to the beginning of your question and talking about the comment I made about evolution, I think in any marketplace there is often an evolution and there's a revolution. And different vendors fall on different sides of that conversation, right? And for me, having been a futures practitioner, the fact is we have a risk today. We have a systemic risk today. You don't need the Ukraine invasion. You don't need a COVID volatility. The volatility we see in the market now, we're seeing consistently across a trading month. So 4 or 5 times a month, you get these huge spikes in volatility. And that isn't anything to do with a macro event. It's that people are trading big volumes for lots of very different reasons. So we have a problem that we need to solve now. So for me, I've always taken the tack of evolutionary change, i.e. what is the most pragmatic way we can affect change with existing industry pipes, with existing industry connectivity. Yeah, refreshing and updating technology, sure. But actually we can do this as part of an evolution, which means market participants will be far more able to pick that up and run with it because they're not having to make a lot of change within their own organizations.
Sure.
On the flip side, there are some people who love the idea of revolution, of disruption, and will build and develop brand new tech to try and force fit around a problem. I'm not saying either one is right or wrong, but that kind of evolutionary approach is the approach that we've taken and have certainly seen a really good reaction from different market participants. Everybody wants a roadmap. I think right now what we've got is the good basis for a potential roadmap to become very clear. Once these standards have been largely approved or agreed by market participants, I think we then have an implementation roadmap that allows us to say, look, actually anyone who's doing business with a particular end client, and the end client is going to demand that any brokers that they give business to are going to have to meet both that timeliness standard and that data standard, and they're going to insist upon it. So it's going to be the difference, I think, of someone doing business and not doing business. I think it's for the broader industry, the executing brokers, the clearing brokers, and the end clients to determine how quickly they're able to implement the standards and the change that we're already proposing. Once that's done, where does it go from there? I mean, goodness.
Time will tell.
Time will tell. And I think other industry events may help shape the futures, the kind of events of the future from a roadmap perspective. I'm not sure it's something that I can get my magic ball out and say where it's going to happen. But there's certainly a lot to do already with the conversation that we're having. So I think we take it one step at a time. Let's get this implemented first, and then let's see whether we already are very clear about the next phase in terms of the roadmap.
And I would probably say that you had mentioned technology, that some technology vendors might try to build a solution to work around the problem rather than to fix it. But I would say that technology is a very powerful tool, and perhaps OSTTRA will have some sort of technologies in the future that will, like we said, it could actually move this roadmap. Or move this sort of roadmap forward in a sense. Absolutely. Listen, I don't think anybody else, any other vendors, are trying to work around the problem. I have no doubt that every vendor who's engaged in this space is trying to solve the problem. I think that's fair to say. Look, I think there is a next phase. We are already involved in digitalizing and tokenizing the ETT transaction that we help process, and that's something that we've worked on with a number of institutional clients that we house within OSTTRA, within our OSTTRA network, and I think that is the very obvious next potential opportunity. I think what we're hearing from the marketplace is one step at a time. We need to solve this big problem today, but we would like to understand, and they're thirsting, the institutional investors are thirsting to understand where they can continue to improve. They've all got budgets to be seen to be developing technologies and getting invested in new technologies. So I think it's fair to say they're very willing participants, but I think we have more work to do to kind of test out some of the theories. But I'm very happy to say that OSTTRA is already on that journey from a digital asset perspective, and there's an awful lot more to come. It also seems to me, with the things that we've been hearing from other asset classes, like for example, the SEC's recent opinion, let's say, and the talk of other markets, let's say, moving from T3 to T1, and now there's talk of T0, right? Like that, in some of these other asset classes or markets, that seems to be the end goal, and it kind of, I can see parallels here in the sense that, by solving these issues, by having a common standard, we're going to speed things up dramatically. You have already sped things up dramatically with respect to OSTTRA itself. Like you said, you have a solution that you don't need 30, 30, and 30. It's pretty much instantaneous.
Correct.
In terms of the solution that can be provided. And so it's the natural logical step in terms of the future evolution of all financial markets.
I absolutely agree. The phrase that I used a bit earlier in our conversation, bringing forward the finality of trade, that's what everybody who is trading and who's worried about risk wants to do.
And needs to do.
And absolutely needs to do. And regulation is demanding that we look to try and do that across every asset class. I think it's fair to say that the listed derivatives market is a pretty immediate marketplace. And the bulk of the kind of transaction operational effort, the bulk, not all of it, takes place on T0. So it takes place on trade date. And that's where a lot of the solutions that OSTTRA and other vendors are putting forward takes place. What you're trying to do is reduce the noise and potential risk that you roll over onto T+1. In the futures market, there you have a margin call. If I'm an end client, I want to be able to test the reasonableness of the margin call that the FCM is producing. I want to make sure it's accurate. The way to make sure it's accurate is reducing the noise, the exceptions, by having a proper and distinct match on T0, so that you get to T1 and there is a certainty around the positions that you house, the margin that you're being called for and are having to pay. And that's effectively what I think the market is trying to do. So from a listed derivatives perspective, I think T0 and T1 is where we sit and have done forever. And I think there are other markets who are going to go a long way, or other asset classes that are going to go a long way to try and bring that risk forward, or try and reduce it by bringing finality of trade forward to T0 and T1. But yeah, everyone is created and structured slightly differently. So it's not, and I don't know all of it, but it's not as easy to do as one might expect.
Well, that was going to be my final question, is do you think that there's certain parallels between, I know there's differences in the markets, in the asset classes themselves, but do you think there's also parallels and sort of synergies where essentially, because the solution hypothetically exists in ETDs today, right, that they could take some of that information and knowledge and run with it for their purposes?
Look, I think if we use another example and look in the cash equities space, the CSDR regulation has increased the risk of exceptions in that world, and therefore, we have, thankfully, a very similar solution where we can match between an EB and a PB dynamically throughout the day to ensure that those exceptions are kept to an absolute minimum. That's new for the market.
Well, there you go.
You know what? So normally they get an end of day trade file from the customer coming into the prime broker. We're saying, why wait? Let's solve it dynamically on T0. So I completely agree with you. I think there are other regulations that are demanding that, whether it's cash equities, fixed income, or any others, are looking at their processes and becoming very risk aware and managing risk as much as they can on T0.
Great, awesome. Well, Joanna, we wanted to thank you for taking the time and sharing your insights. I know this is not the sexiest topic in the world, but OSTTRA makes post-trade sexy.
Now that is a very great line to take away. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
No problem.